So up until this point, Fujifilm really have been the pioneers in the travel camera because, of course, they give you really nice looking JPEG straight out of the camera. You can put on all your film simulations, add the grain and so on and so forth, and it's been really popular for this specific genre of shooting, which is travel photography and video. But the one thing no one talks about with the Lumix S9 is the fact that it basically does what the Fujis do, and in some ways a lot better, because of course we have that LUT functionality, which means you can add basically whatever sort of look you want in camera. But you also actually have a grain option too, and that has 3 settings. It's got low, standard and high. And then what's more, you can also add color noise too, which gives you a very, very retro sort of dad cam sort of look, depending on whether you want that sort of look or not. And I've actually been using the grain function a lot inside the Lumix S9 during this trip because Corfu's a very old place. It looks very, very nostalgic, and therefore I wanted that grainy film look to sort of coincide with the sort of images I wanted to capture. Of course, it's a stylistic choice, and I think the S9 does it really well. You may not realize this, but the Lumix S9 is actually the only full frame mirrorless camera to allow you to add grain in camera, because of course Fujifilm only does APS-C and medium format cameras, and Nikon, Canon, Sony, etc. They don't have the grain function like the S9 does. So really, the best camera that you can get currently that's full frame and gives you these sort of looks you can bake into your photos for JPEGs would be the Lumix S9. It is literally the full frame version of what a Fuji would be, just instead of working with classic chrome or a Turner, for example, you're working with your own LUTs. And I actually think that adding LUTs in camera is a lot more freeing than using the film simulations, because when I used to shoot Fuji back in the day, I had the X100F and the XT3. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I was only using the classic chrome profile. The other ones like Provia, a Turner, etc., I didn't really touch too much, which meant that I was essentially limited to the one look that I actually liked inside the Fuji bodies. Whereas with the Lumix S9, you can put in a Portra 400 look, anything you want sort of thing, get that dialed in camera, you can change the intensity, and then you can also add that grain on top, because of course you may not realize this, but with LUT files, you can't actually copy grain information over. So you might have thought, well, you know, why does it matter having grain in camera if you're just adding a LUT to it? Well, it does, because the cube files don't hold grain information, and there's a few things that you can't actually bake into a LUT file. So the fact you can actually add that after the fact in camera on top of the LUT file sort of gives you the best of both worlds. Even though the S9 does allow you to stack 2 LUTs on top of each other and change the intensity, I actually only used 1 LUT during my time in Corfu, and that was the Streetwise C LUT that's actually free on the Lumix Lab app, so anyone can go ahead and download that one. I think it works really well, and what's more, you can also change what picture profile you're using, so Cine D, Natural, Stand, etc. And I found that Cine D did a really good job in this use case. I was also using the Lumix 28-200 for the duration of my trip in Corfu, and it was fantastic for giving me a little bit of variation in the shots that I was getting. You may have already noticed that I really like to play with reflections in my street photography, and the really nice thing about Corfu is that there's an abundance of Vespers and little mopeds littered around the streets. So what I was doing was actually looking for the wing mirrors that weren't too dirty and trying to capture a different perspective of the scene, but using reflection instead of just shooting it as the eye saw it. And this can be a really interesting sort of technique that will basically raise the creativity of your shots just that little bit more. If you like the idea of getting film-like tones or looks either in camera or when you're editing inside of Lightroom, then I've actually just released my very first preset pack called Digital Film. And there's 7 looks in that pack altogether, 5 color and 2 black and white. And they've all been inspired by popular film stocks such as Kodak E200, Portra 100, 400H, just to name a few of them. And the pack also includes the .cube file, so you can go ahead and load them into your camera and use them within the real-time LUT function, and of course also the XMP file, so you can use those looks inside of Lightroom. It's very rare that I do release anything for sale on this channel, and I always like things to be of the highest quality before I do that. So I am very excited about this preset pack, so if you did want to support the channel, then I'd really appreciate you checking them out. So even though I'm not that old, I was born in 1998, anytime I look back at old photos from family books or memory books and stuff, they always look so nostalgic and so much better than my more modern digital photos. Despite the fact that the modern digital photos are probably technically better images, they just don't carry the nostalgia that the old film photos do. And that's exactly why I love having the grain effect in the S9, because it evokes emotion, it evokes a different sort of sense of nostalgia that you just wouldn't get from any other clean image, if you like. And if you want to take that really nostalgic look one step further, then you can also use a mist or diffusion filter alongside the grain in camera. And then what that does is essentially bloom the highlights, which basically means it makes them look a little bit more fuzzy and dreamlike. But it can be a really nice effect if you are in the Mediterranean, for example, and you've got a lot of harsh sunlight. It just makes it look a little bit more dreamy. One thing that I would say though, if you are wanting to use the grain function inside the S9, is to make sure that you're shooting both JPEG and RAW, because of course you might come back to the holiday photos a couple months later and go, actually, I don't really fancy all that grain on my image. And then the beauty with that is that you have the JPEG file that has all the grain, all the nice nostalgicness, and the RAW file that's still that really beautiful, full frame, digitally perfect sort of look that you can go ahead and, you know, manipulate after the fact. However, there is one downside to this, and I learned that the hard way after writing my script, coming out to Corfu, and then trying to make it happen with a camera, and that's you can't actually activate the grain effect when you're shooting video. I thought you'd be able to do this since the real-time light sort of transfers between both photo and still shooting, but unfortunately the grain effect doesn't, no matter what picture profile you're shooting in, so you can't get that grain look for your video clips. It just means you've got to add it in editing when, to be honest, when you're shooting video anyway, you normally have to do a little bit of editing, whether it's CapCut or Final Cut Pro or whatever you're using. So just bear that in mind. Granted, the difference here being that Fuji has got a much better selection of small compact lenses to go with their APS-C cameras. And of course, they've been doing the sort of JPEG out of camera thing for much longer than Lumix have. But the trade-off, I guess, is sensor size. With the S9, you have a full frame sensor, and therefore the full frame lenses have to cover a bigger imaging circle. So that does inevitably mean that your setup may be a little bit bigger. But if I'm being honest with you guys, when I was shooting with my Fuji cameras, I was using relatively the same size lenses anyway, just with an APS-C camera. Now, I know that that's gonna be a sort of, I guess, controversial point to make about, you know, this being a Fuji killer, essentially. I have got a lot of love for Fuji, if I'm being honest. I think that their design, the sort of tactility of their cameras is absolutely fantastic, and I don't want to slate that for any second. It's just, I think people need to realize that there's more options out there than just what Fuji offers. So if you really like the idea of being able to shoot and share very, very quickly and get that really nostalgic look in camera using the grain feature, the color noise feature, and the real-time LUT function, then there really isn't a better camera to get than the S9.